Yeah, I was working on rebuilding this connector for the fuel pump relay. This particular wire right here, I don't know if you can see that or not, but that's about how much wire was hanging out of the connector. These two red wires right here. And anytime you get like wires that can touch something, spark, or in the vicinity of fuel fumes, that's not a good thing. But anyway, the fuel pump relay, I don't know if you can see these two bolts right there. That's for the map sensor, and then right between there and the wiper motor is you'll see two bolts right there, right there. That's where the fuel pump relay is mounted down there. Just sits on there with these two bolts. But anyway, oh, by the way, make sure you disconnect the battery if you're going to mess around with this electrical stuff here. But anyway, this connector here, I don't know if you'll be able to see this or not, if the camera focuses maybe, but this connector here is marked A, B, C, D, and E. And that corresponds to the schematic, the electrical schematic inside the factory service manual. A, B, C, D, and E. The two red wires that I had showed you, one of these red wires goes to the oil pressure switch, and this other wire goes over to the fuel pump, the actual fuel pump, off of circuit A. As you can see, it's plugged into A. Excuse me. Then you've got this orange wire. This orange wire right here. That it goes to E on this connector. That orange wire comes directly from the battery, and this orange wire is that's a fused link. If you look at the actual wiring diagram, it shows the fusible link that goes to the oil pressure switch and the fuel pump relay as being a fusible link, orange. So, you know, they're not that hard to find. But if you're having trouble, if you can't start the car and you're just cranking and the car isn't starting, that's a place to start, is that fusible link on this orange wire right here. It can't be that, I mean, it's not that hard to find. I've had it in my hand before. It just goes, I mean, you're looking at maybe 24 inches from the battery over to this connector right here. Again, make sure you disconnect the battery. But anyway, back to the connector here. Yeah, I took the liberty of I marked all the wires when I pulled them out, A, B, C, D, and E, with some tape, so I wouldn't make any mistake of putting them back where they belong in the correct position. But so went over the red wire here, goes over to the oil pressure switch, comes off the fuel pump relay and goes over to the oil pressure switch and over to the fuse that fuses the actual pump. These two red wires right here. That's pin A. Pin B is the black and white wire. That's the ground. That's this wire. Black and white striped wire. That's the ground wire. That's grounded. If you look at the factory service manual, it's grounded at G160, which is behind the valve cover down there, and it's also grounded inside the electronic control module. So that's an important one. The green wire, the green and white striped wire right here is the other side of the coil, C. So B is the black and white wire is B, that's the coil, and the green and white wire is pin 18 of the electronic control module, fuel pump relay driver. This wire, this green and white wire, goes straight over to the electronic control module, and so that's your wires. That's the 5 wires that feed the fuel pump relay. The problem with the fuel pump relay is if this fuel pump relay fails for some reason, I want to go inside and take it apart in a few minutes, and I'll show you what's on the inside of this relay. Obviously, this is a very old relay, so they don't use these anymore. But it's got a coil on the inside of it, and it's got a little resistor in there. Yeah, bear with me. I'm not a professional teacher. I do the best I can. But this connector right here has a groove on the side of it right here. That will only fit in the relay one way. You can see the groove right there, so that there are 5 pins on the inside of the fuel pump relay, A, B, C, D, and E, that obviously they need to be correct. Trying to figure out where to go from here with this video. Yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna rebuild this or not. It's in pretty bad shape. I did order a new harness just in case. It's going to be a couple of weeks before I get to it anyway. I really just wanted to take it off and get started. It got up to 45 degrees, so I thought I would take it off. Now this little side cap here, you can just take a little screwdriver and you can just pop that open. I can tell you, getting these terminals out of this connector was very, very hard. I had to fight, and I even have the little aisle terminal tool. It really did not help a lot, which is one of the reasons I went ahead and ordered a new connector. When I put this back together, I'm going to use heat sink. I want to be sure that this is done right this time. You also have a assembly line diagnostic link connector, which is and pin G. That's underneath the dash, just right where your knee is, your right knee for the accelerator. That's where your assembly line comm link is. Pin G is the bottom left pin. Let's see if I can find it right here. Pin G is your fuel pump test. That's the assembly line comm link, which is underneath the dash right below your right knee. If you have a power probe, or if you don't have a power probe, just a wire, you take your wire from the positive side of the battery, and you just touch it to and you just touch it to pin G of that COM link, the fuel pump will come on. And a lot of people say, well, all you need to do is turn the key on, listen for the fuel pump, and you'll know whether your fuel pump is working or not. That's true, but what that gives you with your COM link, pin G of the COM link, by just putting voltage straight to it, is you can communicate with just the fuel pump. You can bypass the oil pressure switch, and you can pretty much bypass the coil inside the fuel pump relay. You can bypass the electronic control module, and you can just communicate, because pins A and D inside the fuel pump relay are always closed. So you're giving voltage straight over through the fuel pump fuse and straight down to the fuel pump, so you can hear whether it's working or not. If you do that and that's not working, this fuel pump pin right here is either broken, which is highly unlikely, or there's a break in the wire somewhere, which would be very easy to trace, or the fuel is blown, or the fuel pump isn't working. But you don't have to worry about the oil pressure switch. You don't have to worry about the electronic control module, that's a good thing. It doesn't even need a ground. The fuel pump's grounded on its own. I may have told you wrong a minute ago, so I just want to be sure I get this correct. Here's the groove. And it would be A, B, C, D, E. E closest to the groove. How the fuel pump relay works is, as soon as you turn the key on for the battery feed, that supplies voltage to both the oil pressure switch and the fuel pump relay, which in turn primes the fuel pump for 2 seconds. And if the electronic control module does not sense some sort of rotation from the distributor, the car is not going to start. But as soon as you start pumping, as soon as you start cranking the car, and if you can build up oil pressure, 4 or 5 psi of oil pressure, the oil pressure switch closes. So then you've got juice going straight over to the oil pump. So even if this is malfunctioning, if your fuel pump relay is malfunctioning, you're going to have long cranking times. But if your battery isn't really weak, and it's not really cold, and the oil's not really thick, and you can get good turnover and you've got a good oil pump inside of your crankcase. The reason it's important to have 12.6 volts on your battery is, if you look at, this is the fuel injection ECM connector identification chart. Pin 18 of the black connector is the fuel pump relay. Pin 18 of the white connector on the electronic control module is the fuel pump relay driver. And with the engine off, key on, engine off, you should see 0 voltage there. With the car running, you should see 14 volts. That's why it's important that your alternator is charging and putting out the correct voltage. Although this says the voltage readings that you get on this chart right here may vary some, they should be very close. You should see 14 volts on that fuel pump relay drive, which is pin 18 of that is the green and white wire that feeds this coil, that energizes this coil. And from then on, with this coil energized, that's what's feeding the fuel pump. If you look at pin 17 of the electronic control module, that's a relay switched input for the relay. And pin 17 is showing 14.1. It's a voltage monitor. If it doesn't see the voltage that it wants to see, it's just going to shut things down. Like I say, the car will run if the fuel pump relay isn't working, but the problem is you're going to have very long cranking times, and if you can't build the pressure that you need, like 5 psi, 4 or 5 psi, then this oil pressure switch is not going to close, and then you're not going to have any circuit. If you look at the wiring schematic, and you put a multimeter on your fuel pump relay, you should have continuity all the time between, without key on, nothing. That's the assembly line COM link. D. You should have continuity between D and A all the time. So you should have continuity between terminals A and D. If you energize the coil, by putting current to B and C, you should hear it click. You should hear the relay click, and then you should have continuity between A and E. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but it's clicking. So if you energize, then you should have continuity between pins A and E, which is the furthest two. I may have told you wrong a minute ago, so I just want to be sure I get this correct. Here's the groove. And it would be A, B, C, D, E. E closest to the groove. You can take this cap off the relay. You have to be careful with these tabs. They're plastic. You kind of just see how I actually broke this one a little bit right there. But you kind of just lift them up. It's got a little catch on the actual relay, and then the cap just comes off. Of course, there's 4 of them. That exposes the relay, the coil. There's a tiny resistor. There's a tiny resistor right there underneath the coil, the little blue resistor. I've looked. I don't know what the resistance is on it, but I can tell you that you should, when I'll test in a minute, the resistance on the coil should be 20 ohms or more per the factory service manual. And you can just do a check. Any wire broken, that coil right there is going to render this worthless. The factory service manual calls for the resistance in the coil inside of this relay should be 20 ohms or more. So just set your multimeter to ohms. And you should test between you just want to place the probes on between B and C. That's where the coil is. So this is A, furthest away from the groove. A's here, B and C. So just put the probes on B and C, and you should see $20 ohms at least. Takes it a minute, so 56 ohms. That's good. I actually think most relays are even higher than that, but that's what this one calls for. So you should have continuity without any power at all between A and D. Should have continuity between A and D. I had the opportunity to talk to a retired General Motors engineer when I went down to the Corvette Museum down in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and he was telling me that most of the problems on the 1984 Corvette can be traced back to a grounding issue or a wiring issue. More importantly, a grounding issue. It was a challenge to ground the 1984 Corvette because of the aluminum. A lot of the body was aluminum, all fiberglass. So they had to get pretty creative in grounding all these systems. The galvanized frame, a lot of it was painted. The entire fuel control system is electrically operated, and it all goes through the electronic control module. Everything goes through the electronic control module controls everything. The idle air control valves, the fuel injectors out of pins 8 and 9. So if you're having problems getting the car started, I'm not talking about rough idle issues, but just getting the car started, hard starting, or just won't start, but you check you do a diagnostics check on your fuel pump through pin your pin G on your your assembly line comm link through your fuel pump relay D to A over to your fuel pump, and your fuse is good, your pump is pumping, and you have a way to check your fuel pressure, and you're getting somewhere around between 10 and 13 psi, then more than likely your problem is going to be in a wiring situation, but more than likely a ground somewhere, or a wire or a loose connection somewhere. Without getting into it in this video, you can actually take your electronic control module out from underneath the dash, and you can actually lay it down. I'll put a picture in there, but I'm not going to do it this time, but I'll put a picture in there. The electronic control module will actually lay down on the floorboard. And you'll have a white connector. And you'll have a white connector and a black connector. White connector that shows you every single pin on that connector that you can test, and it actually gives you all the voltages that you should see. For instance, on the front and rear injector, you should see 12.3 volts at pin 8 and 9 on the black connector, and if the engine is running, and you can run the engine with the electronic control module laying on the floor, you should see 14.2. And again, although it says your voltages may vary depending, they should be very close to that. Same with the white connector. You have your IAC coils, but the white connector has a little bit more. Has your map, battery. The way the 1984 Corvette works, as soon as you turn the key on and you power the key to the on position, you're not trying to start it, you just turn the key on. The electronic control module tells the fuel pump relay to energize the fuel pump, which primes the fuel lines for 2 seconds and 2 seconds only. As soon as you actually start cranking the engine, turning the key to the start position, and you can build up 4 or 5 psi, this oil pressure switch closes right here, so you then have current going straight over to the pump, and the car should start. But as soon as the electronic control module reads pulses from the distributor, it will energize pin 18 of the fuel pump relay drive, which is this green wire that goes back to the fuel pump relay. Energize this coil, and that from that point A and E will close, and that is how the electronic control module sends power to the fuel pump through this green wire, through this coil. Without getting too involved, it's circuit 451. As you can see right there, circuit 451 on the electronic control module. But you can see this is the electronic control module, which sits underneath the dash on the passenger side. You can see the 2 pins, the 2 connectors, I'm sorry. Circuit 451 and circuit 452 plug right into the. You can test every single pin in the electronic control module by just laying 2 10mm bolts, hold it up in there, lay it right down on the floorboard, and test every single pin in both the white and the black connectors, circuit 451 and circuit 452.